Awesome. Thanks, hon. So, what I'd like to do is give our guest a warm welcome. But first, I do want to point out that you were my biochemistry mentor back at Cleveland. Actually, you know what? It says something went wrong. So hang on one sec. Let me holler at Tiffany and see why something came up and said it's not live streaming real quick. Hang on one sec. I'm not a technology guy at all. All right, awesome. Sorry about that technological delay there. So I'll go ahead and get restarted. Let's give our guest a warm welcome. First, I want to point out that you were my biochemistry mentor back at Cleveland, and absolutely essential for many of my colleagues for even passing that course, which was very vigorous. I'll just put it mildly. So consider you an expert and a genius intellect amongst, this big field of doctors we're surrounded around. So from Boise, Idaho, he's a brilliant chiropractor, a functional wellness practitioner who's also licensed with the Pastoral Medical Association. He has an extensive postdoctorate training that includes true cellular healing, CPK, which is chiropractic plus kinesiology, applied kinesiology, clinical kinesiology, neuromodulation, bioresonance therapy, nutrition, and medical IV infusion therapy, just to name a few. In addition, he's trained with leading scientists, Lyme experts, and parasitology experts, giving him a very well-rounded knowledge base on this topic of stealth infections. It's a true honor and a privilege to have you with us today, my friend, Dr. Todd Watts.
Thanks for having me on here, Dr. Gabe. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. So for our listeners out there, could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you kind of came across this journey in your own life?
Yeah, so in my previous career, I'm 50, I'll be 51 this year. And before I was in the real estate market, and the crash of 2008 happened. And I had a mortgage company, a real estate company, and I ended up losing everything. So I lost my houses, cars, and I had to decide what to do. At the time, that was in my late 30s. I was having some health issues, but you know what? You just push through them. Headaches, joint pain, allergies, fatigue, and you add in all that stress, it just took me over the top. But really, my journey began 10 years before that when I had Epstein-Barr virus. And so Epstein-Barr virus, to me, feels like where a lot of my symptoms started occurring after having that issue. So things just over the next 10 years after just started adding up until that traumatic event of what I went through. And I came out, I went back to school to get my doctorate at the age of 41. And in that process, I was able to learn from some amazing people about Lyme disease and Babesia from co-infections, which described all the symptoms I was having at the time. So going through and getting tested and came out positive for chronic Lyme disease and co-infections. And in treating that stuff, I got better a little bit, probably 30% better with symptoms, but I still had a lot of problems. And whether it was my brain issues and memory and these headaches I just couldn't get on top of. I had to avoid foods to not get them. And the fatigue probably was one of the biggest issues I went through during that time period. It was for a course about 10 years. And so that's when I learned about parasites. The doctor said, hey, you got parasites. So then I jumped into it, figured out what it was and how to treat. And my symptoms 80% better. I mean, just phenomenal how much better I got. But I still had some symptoms with muscle fatigue and brain stuff. And then I got into doing, learning about chronic viruses and erythroviruses, and then also dealing with toxicity. So, clearing heavy metals and getting, the amalgams removed out of my mouth, clearing toxins, radiation. And so with doing that, it really, really turned me around to where now I work out 5 days a week, and I, run 2 successful businesses, and I have 4 children, ages of 4 to 12. So I'm a busy guy in working with my family just alone. But I feel very grateful to be able to help coach people back with their health that deal with a lot, that I've seen 10 to 100 doctors and can't figure out why they're sick or how to get better, and taking them through the process of doing that is what I do, because I lived that journey. I went through it. And I don't know if you remember back in school, they created that Facebook page called Sleeping in School. They take pictures of people sleeping in school, post it. That was all created because of me, because they were taking pictures of me falling asleep in classes. I couldn't stay awake. Was so tired and fatigued. And good thing I was a really good studier to help me get through that process, because it just, that fatigue part really rocked me on that.
Yeah. Amazing story. Glad to hear about the end of it, and you're actually enjoying your family and stuff like that, because that's really what life's all about.
It is.
So coming through your journey, how important is it for our listeners just to kind of understand, with chronic Lyme patients, how important is it to make sure that they clear the parasites out as well?
Well, that's one of the biggest things I learned about this process is I used to cycle a lot. So I'd treat the Lyme of Babesia, felt good for a little bit, and then I'd crash again. And it wasn't until I realized that the parasites were the big part of what was suppressing the immune system. So when you look at the immune system, there's 2 main pathways that most people are familiar with, Th1 and Th2. And especially if you have autoimmunity, Hashimoto's, those are common things and more driven on the Th2 side. So what parasites do is they upregulate the Th2 immune system. When that happens, it secretes what we call interleukin-4. It's a cytokine that then comes over to the Th1 side and binds onto the macrophage, holding these viruses at bay. And most of us have viruses in our body, whether viruses or retroviruses. And when that happens, it starts replication, turns a gene on, starts replication of the viruses, and then suppresses the immune system on the Th1 side. So now we have viruses and bacteria like Lyme and stuff being active over here, while the immune system of Th2 is overactive with dealing with parasites. And, in Dr. Hulda Clark's work, she talked about a lot of the viruses in Epstein-Barr correlating with specific parasites and how that is. I now then, in researching it further, there's a lot of research on PubMed and articles in regards to the immune correlation of why that happens. And then you look at some Dr. Alan McDonald's work. He's a MD, a pathologist, and done a lot of research in neurological diseases like Alzheimer's and MS. And his work showed on his MS study that the Lyme in the nervous system creating the MS really was 100% of the tissues had nematodes also in the brain or the spinal cord. So they go hand in hand, and we can't blame it all on Lyme disease. And that's where so many people that I do see for, quote, Lyme, I hardly ever end up doing much on Lyme, because it's an immune system problem. They have Lyme, they have like 5 different viruses, they have all these things, and it's an immune system and energy problem. So then it goes back to mitochondrial function and then what we need to do. But the biggest thing we're ignoring, because it's hard to find unless I muscle test for it, and I also look at symptoms and case history extensively, and doing assessments for parasites and seeing which ones they are and addressing that realm. Because once you hit that, man, boy, the other shift happens so much better on the Lyme part and on the chronic viral issues.
Yeah. Muscle testing is extremely important for pinpointing these things. I find that extremely valuable in clinical practice. So for our listeners, that are kind of hearing all this different stuff about, viruses, parasites, and things like that, how would you categorize these? Do you categorize them differently? Say H. pylori is one, Epstein-Barr something different, and then there's yeast, fungus, mold, candida, and then there is this whole group of parasites that has everything from nematodes to strongyloids to worms and things like that. Are they categorized differently?
Yeah, so on the parasite things, there's cestodes, trematodes, nematodes, and protozoans. Protozoans being the microscopic ones, such as Toxoplasma gondii. Another one is Babesia malaria. Those are the ones that you can see in our blood cells and are important to really look at, especially with specific symptoms. The nematodes are threadworms like strongyloids, roundworms, pinworms, hookworms, and then you have your trematodes that are your flukes. And so there's different flukes. Liver flukes are the most common. There's pancreatic flukes, which both of those can be related specifically towards the Epstein-Barr virus, according to Holder Clark. And there's intestinal flukes, blood flukes. And so there's a whole wide array of those things that can create a lot of problems. Lung flukes. And then you have your cestodes, which are your tapeworms. And, your most common ones that we see are stuff like your pork tapeworm, your beef tapeworm, there's dog tapeworm, fish tapeworm, there's the dwarf tapeworm, and there's several other ones too. But those are really common because of the fact that many people have animals, and so if you're around animals, you're more than likely going to have, especially dogs, roundworm and tapeworm. And then if you eat beef or especially pork, where I've had patients that grew up in Mexico and they raised pigs and other patients in Texas that had pig farm, they all had tapeworm. And strongyloids, something you can get right just walking in the soil, or I see it a lot, just the parent passing on to the child in utero through that process. It's a threadworm that's extremely more common than what most people think, and that was one of the ones I struggled with quite extensively personally, and probably with what caused my headaches, right? So that's the number one cause of headaches in my research is the strongyloids.
Yeah. And
then from there, you have your other things, your viruses, your mold, your bacteria such as Lyme. They have the H. pylori, and then you get into the gut. So the gut dysbiosis and the gut bacteria, what you're looking at is why is that happening? And that's when you go back to all this glyphosates and herbicides, pesticides, heavy metals that created a dysbiosis, that created overgrowth of fungus and yeast and the bacteria. And so the chronic H. pylori is probably due to an issue with those issues or even parasites.
Yeah. And and that is a really good point. One of the things that I learned in practice, one of my, a gentleman came in my life, he gave me a DVD and he kind of mentioned, this never happened. And so I took this home and I watched it, and I watched, it was an old film of Dr. Versendahl doing contact reflex analysis in the 1980s. And I would consider him probably my first mentor getting into energy work. You know how it was at school. I mean, nobody talked about this. Nobody really talks about what true healing is. It's just kind of a political thing to get you in and out, get you on the streets, and getting in the system of adjusting and referring. When you really want to make a difference, it's helpful to have mentors. And I watched Dr. Versendahl in 1989 in a big conference room filled with people, and he actually called people up and was actually muscle testing them and pinpointing what their problem was. And this was 1989. So the biggest thing he found were viruses, impacted bowels, lots of stress. Okay. And that was, again, 1989. And then the mid 90s hit. And that's when we really started using genetically modified organisms and started using this Roundup in astronomical amounts, 300 million pounds a year. Now we're looking at, 75% of our rain has this water soluble antibiotic in it. And I think what it's done is it accelerated this epidemic across the country, made people's microbiome compromised, and now nearly everyone has parasites. Would you agree with that?
I think so. And what's interesting is that that's what people need to understand, is to get the parasites and the organisms, cleared out, get a balance, right? Because you're never fully going to clear everything out.
Yeah.
But to get the balance is you have to address toxicity and the body's ability to detoxify. So it's not just detoxing, but it's opening up drainage and helping the body to restore its own methods of doing that.
Yeah, exactly. So I do want to address this real quick. There's a very common misconception out there especially in our healthcare system. It doesn't even recognize these stealth infections, Epstein-Barr, things like that. But parasites have definitely not been part of American culture. And whenever we routinely see doctors and health professionals claim that they either don't exist. I mean, I had a patient yesterday, okay? A patient of mine came in chronic pain. I've used several of some of your tools actually, passing many things that she's seeing come out. Her pain is substantially changing. And she's had a dozen doctors tell her there's no way this is parasites, and she visibly sees them in the stool. People are under the impression that parasites are something strictly to a third world country. How common are parasites in people today?
Well, I always tell people that if they have a pulse, they have a parasite, and so it's in everyone. It's one of those things to think that you don't is really ignorant. I have people that I dealt with, and these were very educated people, a pharmacist and an engineer, and they had some chronic issues going on with parasites, and they tested positive in the stool samples and things. And we came to find out in testing that it was their municipality water that had actually nematode larvae in it. So this is in the Northeast, that it was in their water. They tested not only their own, they tested their neighbor's water. They started asking around that all these people had GI problems. They tested downtown, some businesses downtown, and it came up positive. And you think about our foods are from international sort places, we're around animals. It's way more common than we can have an idea. The issue is we're also a global world now. It's like all these people come over from the border, from Mexico, right? People flying in from Asia, people flying in from all over the world, from Africa. We accept that they have parasites in their countries, but then all of a sudden now they live here and now they just magically disappear. Like they have borders. So when they cross the border to the United States, they don't exist. Lyme disease is the same way. You can't cross states because the CDC says it's not in that state. Well, the mosquitoes know that, and so do ticks that are on deer. The deer know that they're not supposed to cross over, and it doesn't make common sense. So everybody has them. And if you're looking at symptoms, you have to consider that you may not find them on a stool sample, and that's the problem. You can't find them on the magical stool sample ovum parasites, but then you can send in an actual parasite textbook looking fluke, like some of my patients have sent in, that you can open a typical parasite manual, see the fluke, send it in, it's negative. Like, how is that negative? Send a worm in, like, how is that actual worm negative? Because their testing methods are antiquated and they don't know, they just don't. And not only they only test for certain ones anyways. You have to really go off more symptom case history. You can't believe how many people I work with. I've had headaches for 10 years, migraines, seen all these doctors, all these gut problems, back pain out into my legs. And I'm like, well, when did this start? Well, I was on a cruise down in the Caribbean, down to Mexico, and I just haven't been the same since. Or I have a gal who's like, oh, Epstein-Barr virus and chronic Epstein-Barr for 4 years. I'm a freshman, sophomore in college. When did it start happening? Right before my freshman year of high school, I got really sick. Well, where were you? I was in Honduras for a trip, Christian trip. I'm like, did you drink the water? Yeah, I got exposed to the water. I was sick for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
It's like you should start doing some history, and it's a common sense. But we don't need to go over there to get it. We can get it here as well, being around our food sources and animals and water. I had a little girl in Florida that I worked with, and she was 7 years old. Was having all this pain in her bladder, and her mom took her to all the specialists, gastroenterologists, urologists, pediatricians, and they could come up with nothing because nothing showed on the labs. And through muscle testing, I come up with a schistosome and hookworm. And so when I started researching it, I asked, okay, the time this started happening, where were you? We were in Ohio in Labor Day weekend. That water's, of course, how the water gets by September. It's disgusting. Bacteria, parasites. And more than likely, she just probably had a secariae of a schistosome, a hookworm that came up through her ureter and into her bladder. And they penetrate the skin as well. So it was causing it. And so I referred her to a medical doctor. She got a prescription for medication that goes right along with it. And 3 days later, the pain was gone. And here could have been a lifelong issues with bladder pain and urinary issues if we hadn't figured it out.
Yeah, unfortunately, far too many people out there are suffering with these, mystery illnesses and things like that, and it's simply overlooked. I had a woman who came in last year, wonderful farmer, okay, 25 out of 10 on a pain scale. That was her pain. I mean, during sitting just a consult, she just couldn't even not even get comfortable. And being a farmer her whole life, I mean, her husband had tremors, and I when he started asking, I said, well, all the farming states have the highest cases of Parkinson's because of the heavily exposure to Roundup and things like that. But this woman could not sleep more than 15 minutes. And you're talking, if somebody touched her, she would just cry in severe pain. And it was all parasite related completely. Fibromyalgia pain's completely gone from that. And it completely changed her mind about, I mean, she'd been to the Mayo Clinic 3 times. They lost her file. It completely changed her mind about the medical system. And I did tell her, to their credit, I was a paramedic. I worked for, about a year in and out of hospitals, and they can do wonderful things for trauma. You get in a car accident, you get into, you fall off the roof of your house, cleaning leaves or something for the spring. That's when you want to go to the hospital, have them put you back together again. But you need to get to someone else after that, because the healing doesn't take place in hospitals. But you bring up another really good point. One of some of the most overlooked sources of parasites that we have in our country, you mentioned animals, pets, things like that. But what are some more common overlooked sources that these things can come out of?
I think that the water, it's lake water is one of the things, especially warmer water. The other thing is food sources. Our municipality water can have it at times. Just other people. Interesting. I saw a study that looked at the grocery carts you push around the store with, and the study showed 85% had fecal matter on it. Yeah. So it's just grossed me out so bad. I'm like, well, wiping those things all the time.
Yeah.
But it's like, who sits on those? You got little babies that could be reaching in their diaper, touching them, and kids get, they say 50% of kids in school have pinworms. They get exposed to that, especially in nurseries and daycares, probably most heavily. Just living in today's world is how it is. I mean, it's just going to happen, and you realize you just have to keep a balance in life, and cleanse every once a year, twice a year. Our grandparents, our great grandparents, they used to take turpentine and do parasite cleansing on a yearly basis. And especially if you work with horses and cattle and sheep and those things, go to the store, there's huge rows of antiparasitics. You go to PetSmart or Petco, there's a full row of antiparasitics for dogs and cats. So to think that we don't get exposed to any of that stuff, we treat our animals better than we treat ourselves.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. And even Dr. Joel Wallach pointed that out about how many diseases we actually have prevented in our animals by using minerals in their food, adding minerals to the food. And, they were going to put a healthcare system in place in the 50s, and they thought, well, your average consumer could no longer afford these animal goods. You couldn't buy a dozen eggs or chicken because it would just be overwhelmingly expensive to pay for this healthcare. So they got the idea of, well, we're going to eliminate diseases in animals by adding minerals to the food, including muscular dystrophy. That was actually called white muscle disease back in the 50s, and they added selenium to the food, and that's just one of the things they wiped out. Absolutely, they take care of animals, and I always find it odd because I've got pets, and I have some leopard geckos in this aquarium behind me, and when I go in there and I go to buy crickets or whatever it is, they always have you'll see little signs. I even snapped a picture of one that said, don't handle these things. You can get a parasite. They are able to contain parasites and this and that. And then also the water, if you buy fish, they're like, don't use tap water. Mm-hmm. It's great for you though, but they can't handle the fluoride. So it makes you very curious about what's really going on out there.
Well, you brought up a good point there, the mosquitoes. So let's say insects, mosquito bites is a really good way to get infection. We always talk about viruses, H1N1, Zika, but they also pass parasites as well. And so, flea bites, mosquito bites, spider bites, ticks, of course. Those all can be transmission vectors that we can receive these. And I've been bit up like crazy in the past with mosquito bites. Crazy.
Yeah.
Hundreds of them, and eventually my body just couldn't handle it, or I got infected with one of them. And so then I would get a mosquito bite and that thing would swell up to a huge welt all over my body. And I think it was because I got Lyme or a Babesia at one of those injections. Now my body doesn't do that. Now my allergies are gone, that I used to have severe allergies, and multiple symptoms have been resolved due to the fact that I addressed these infections. And then also, it's not just addressing the infection, it's bringing the cellular energy up, because the mitochondria is so important in healing the body and being sure you're able to drain and cleanse the toxins out as well.
Exactly. And when somebody gets a bug bite or a mosquito bite, and here we are in the spring weather, so it's going to be more common. That's a good point. If somebody gets a mosquito bite and it swells up big, that's a good sign that your detox pathways are just blocked. You're not able to clear that stuff out.
Or even that maybe you got an infection on that thing. Sure. I would be applying some things on there, essential oils or herbs or our oxygen product to help to kill those.
Mm-hmm.
I've even injected them as well.
I always give people bug bite protocols, and not only the stuff they can inject in their mouthpiece or even the possibility of venom, but the more suspect is actually what's on their mouthpiece when they do bite.
Mm-hmm.
So symptoms that show up in people can absolutely vary different from adult to child. I mean, from what I see, they're actually displayed different. Can you give us some common examples of symptoms that are real common in children that maybe should cue parents to maybe think this is a parasite-related problem?
So with kids, I'm going to look at constipation as a big issue, eczema, skin problems, ADD, ADHD, focus, behavior, anger, just they can't sit still, their bum itches. Those are super common ones. Reaction to foods, especially dairy, proteins are going to be a major issue with that. Strongyloides seems to, that there's a correlation with dairy and strongyloides, and it could be other foods as well. But a lot of the proteins, they really like protein, so they're going to slow your digestive system down, create that more of that constipation, so they can eat the nutrients, so the person's not eating the nutrients. And then they also create an environment that bacteria thrive, and then they also, the whole point is for them to get the nutrients, not the child to get the nutrients.
Yeah, and that brings up another thing. Can parasites cause anemia in children?
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
About other nutritional deficiencies as well?
Mm-hmm. Depression, anxiety. Certain parasites like Toxoplasma gondii and some hookworms, schistosoma, those can affect the GAD enzyme, which converts the glutamate to GABA for the calming purposes. And since it inhibits that enzyme production and conversion, then it can create more of the anxiety or more depression. I've seen seizures as well as a problem, and we've had phenomenal results with kids on that. But they definitely play a role in the toxo. You can get that from kitty litter, right? They tell you not to change a kitty litter if you're pregnant. You still can get the parasite. Pork is a really good source of that too.
I have seen some pretty good sources and studies out there that say that, at least one out of three seizures is parasite related on the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So as a functional medicine doctor, it's important to look at the root causes of these nutritional deficiencies in children, especially anemia, things like that. So it's better to look at the root cause, not recommend an iron supplement for a child without looking upstream for a possible parasite cause. Would you agree?
I agree. And that's the problem we have with functional medicine today. I get people's protocols and it's like, oh, here's vitamin D, here's B vitamins, here's calcium. They're giving all these nutrients to people, but they're not really getting to the underlying cause. They say functional medicine is about root cause treatment, but it's not. It's not, because we're not deficient in everything. That's just garbage.
Yeah.
So the problem is they're ignoring the infections, they're ignoring the toxins or the heavy metals that are inhibiting the production of enzymes or inhibiting mitochondrial function or inhibiting the neurotransmitters and hormone processes that are going on. And you got to go deeper. You have adrenal fatigue. Why? I have leaky gut. Why?
Yeah. Usually
It's a deeper issue. You have to go. It's the why. It's always the why, not just, the first, it's here's another supplement. Then the supplements become just like a medication trying to support a pathway. And I'm not a big believer in just supporting pathways to support functional medicine. Hey, you need more GABA. Here's all the nutrients to make more GABA. Instead of saying, okay, what's inhibiting that? Why do you need that in the first place if you're eating a really good diet?
I agree, and I'm so glad you pointed that out. Literally, you mentioned you've seen people that have seen tens to hundreds of doctors. The average person that walks into my clinic has seen the average of 12 doctors, and 40% at least of those are other functional medicine doctors. And I've mentioned this many times in past lectures. Our clinic has never seen a local functional medicine doctor, a naturopath, a DAPC, an internist, a pediatrician ever catch a parasite in people. So I think this is something greatly overlooked. And I think that's where the value of muscle testing and not just muscle testing, because I've had people come in and they said, I've seen muscle testers, but they all miss it because they're not aware of it, right? I mean, I worked with a doctor that's phenomenal. He's been in business since 1971 and a pioneer in the industry with Dr. Beardall and clinical kinesiology work. And rarely did he ever pick up a parasite as being a main cause of anything. So it's going back to, it's not just muscle testing. Really, it's about looking at what are the symptoms. Because when you start looking at it and researching, you're like, oh, wow. Okay, yeah, parasites can really have a high thing. Hulda Clark wrote a book called Cure for All Diseases. And in that book, what did it say? I mean, it talks about all these symptoms specifically with a specific parasite and toxins and metals. And so with that process is understanding, go do the research, then you just know, okay, these symptoms, are results of these type of parasites. So then it allows me to focus in on where would it be. So if I was muscle testing it, I'm going to go to the liver, I'm going to go to the gut, I'm going to go to the lungs, I'm going to test specific areas and look at why it's happening. And so you have to be aware of it. Otherwise, energetically, you're not going to pick it up. But then, I have assessment forms that test. It's like, they ask all these questions. And if you have these questions answered positively, rate them on a scale and get a number, those more than likely you have parasites. And then you look at case history, and you just dive into asking a lot of questions, and you realize, okay, it just common sense says you got parasites, and it's not going to show up on your test. So you can go spend $400 on your stool sample and another $2,000 on continuing testing it. Comes up negative with your functional med doctor, so you're never going to treat it. Because they're ignoring, because of the lack of knowledge, they're ignoring the parasite infection. And you realize, like hives. I've treated a lot of people for hives. One gal had it for a year straight. And within 10 days after getting her on a protocol, she passed a 6-foot tapeworm. And she hasn't had a hive since. And multiple people that have had hives, treating tapeworm and parasites, boom, cleared them out, haven't had hives since. So is that always the case? Probably not, but it definitely can be a major contributor to that issue. Just like roundworm is probably the major contributor towards eczema and headaches. Strongyloides is a major contributor to headaches and migraines. And so that's why, reading these books, some of these pioneers in the industry are phenomenal. And Dr. Newsom in my clinic, he worked specifically with Hulda Clark, 25 years ago. And, we were having a conversation the other day about sinuses and parasites. And he's like, oh yeah, strongyloides are get in the sinuses and clog them up and cause a lot of problems. That's why people have chronic sinus issues. And I had figured that out on my own. I didn't realize that Hulda had, Dr. Clark had even talked about that. But, it's amazing the information that you can't find out there. But we're not taught in that in school. We're not taught in the medical field about it at all, because you can't get it on a test. Yeah, I agree. And I always have to tell people, I had a new patient yesterday and I was kind of going through this. And one of the biggest symptoms that I see that always makes me cue in patients are parasites. Of course, all the gut issues, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, diverticulitis, all the aerial bowel things always have some kind of parasite component. But there might be more. There might be gallbladder. But I always tell people, if you have allergies year round, you have an infection, no doubt. And if they're taking antihistamines or Claritin or something like that, they're just going to block that detox pathway of the liver, phase 1 and phase 2, and just ensure that whatever's inside them is just going to grow deeper and deeper and deeper.
For sure.
So we talked about children. Let's talk about adults a little bit. And we kind of mentioned that. What do you think the most common symptoms are in adults that can indicate parasites? Probably A to Z, right?
Any symptom, I could probably find a parasite related to that. It's that common. And, you know, in her book, she talks about that too. I mean, you can just go through all the symptoms and she correlates those things. And it's a really good resource for understanding more how prolific they are. But, you know, allergies, even just seasonal allergies. And once I cleared the parasites, I haven't had seasonal allergies anymore.
Yeah.
You know, I used to have them really bad. Food allergies, especially dairy, corn, soy, gluten, eggs. You know, if you're having allergies to those things, you have a parasite. Gut distension, all this, you know, of course, any gut issues, pain in your liver, chronic viral issues is a really good one to say, hey, I got, you know, chronic Epstein-Barr or mono. I can't get rid of stuff. I can't get rid of my H. pylori. You probably have a parasite. You know, there's lung issues, asthma.
Yeah,
you know, parasites create most asthma issues probably.
Yeah, they love lungs. That's what I've seen. Actually, they love lungs. They love ears. They love feet. You know, and the odd changes behind around a full moon too are big indicators for people too, especially when you bring it to their attention. I mean, you can ask any school teacher, nurse. You can ask any law enforcement officer. I've got plenty of those as patients, and I ask them, you know, what's a full moon like? Oh, the public comes unwound, and then nobody knows why. And it regulates the hatch cycle of these guys.
It does.
What about you know, people with insomnia? You know, what role do they play with insomnia?
So they're very active at night, and so they either can raise your cortisol, or they also can secrete ammonia and acetaldehyde, which are toxins that can create issues in the brain and sleep. And so they, you know, having specific binders that will help to bind that ammonia, clear it out. If your liver isn't working well, then the urea cycle within the liver isn't working well. What that means is ammonia is converted to urea, which then goes into the blood, which then goes to the kidneys, and we urinate it out. And so I look for a low bun on their blood work, and if that marker is low, then it could be an issue that they have. Either they are more vegan and just don't eat much meat and protein, or if they do, then it's a urea cycle problem more than likely. And you know, people can smell the ammonia on their bodies a lot of times. People are like, oh yeah, still smell of the ammonia, it's horrible. Or they're peeing it out. Well, you know, that's a sign. Your hands, tingling, numbness. Lyme can create the same thing. Lots of bacteria creates a lot of ammonia as well. And then overeating protein can create a lot of ammonia byproduct. So I created a product specifically for that. And it does a really good job in upregulating some of the liver pathways with mold, ammonia, and the biotoxins and endotoxins that we get exposed to.
You know, and we've already kind of discussed this a little bit. In our practice here, we've been pretty disappointed with stool testing overall. We use various kinds as far as revealing the actual load that a person might be carrying. And a while back, I interviewed someone who's a good friend, Dr. Jeff Senchel, out of Diverse Health Services in Michigan. And him and I kind of said the same thing. He's an avid contact reflex analysis, you know, doctor. And we discussed this on the air. How much do these tests miss, and how important it is to be an avid muscle tester to pick these up and even go a little deeper, especially with the history and the symptoms and stuff like that. So how critical is muscle testing, in your opinion, as being able to find these things, and also perhaps use the right modality as well? Because you could find something and you could have A to Z on what to use, but muscle testing can actually really help narrow that down a little bit. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I mean, you can look at my bio there, right? You mentioned I got 100 hours in applied kinesiology. I worked my first year with a doctor that taught for clinical kinesiology years ago. I I took the CPK, the chiroplastic kinesiology courses, 5 times each, and taught it. I learned neuromodulation technique that is pretty in depth with that stuff. So I spent a lot of time in research and working with the best doctors in that area of testing. And so with doing that, part of it is you got to realize that people get different results based off their knowledge and their energies, right? So if a doctor isn't familiar with certain things, he's just never going to pick it up, in my opinion. So you're only as good as your knowledge, and that's why I'm always studying and learning. And to be an expert in cell function and mitochondrial function is where I put a lot of time into immune function, correlation with all these infections and toxins. Super important to know about all of them. And then as you know all of them, then you're just aware, and then I'm not biased towards anything. Oh, everything's Lyme disease. So people will like muscle test and like, oh, you got Lyme, that's your problem. I'm like, it's not Lyme. Yeah. Or it's like, oh, he's a mold guy, so everything's mold. Or it's like everything's heavy metals. I'm like, no, it's not. It's all the above most of the time. Or you just have to realize that all these things can be similar to each other in certain ways. And if you have knowledge about and expertise in all areas and those things, and you've put a lot of time into it, like I have, then I just go with whatever it really is. And that's why we get really good results. And then also it's helped me understanding products and understanding nutrition and binders and the body. I've been able to formulate a whole product line that a lot of doctors use and get phenomenal results with that they've never gotten results with before, because our products are not only energetics as part of the development of them, but also there's a lot of science that goes behind them with our scientists and understanding the right pH of the products, understanding how to protect them through the stomach acid, understanding how to activate them and getting them to where they need to go, and having high enough energy to do what they're supposed to be doing. Most companies don't do that. And so most of the products they're taking are crap, or most of the products they're taking they're getting very little bit to the cell, where, our goal is to get super high amounts to the cell that is going to shift that and make the difference.
Yeah. And I understand you are personally responsible for bringing Mimosa pudica to the United States, right?
Mimosa pudica seed.
Okay.
So
seed.
There's Mimosa pudica whole plant that a couple other companies had before I brought the seed to the market, which is, has gone global now with me bringing it to the healthcare industry. And, we're the leaders in that area. And it's just been breakthrough for so many people, helping to cleanse stuff out of their gut.
Yeah, I really commend your hard work and your dedication to this, because it's definitely needed now. And me being in touch with you and using these products has absolutely been fantastic, particularly for biofilms in our office. And thanks for all your hard work and dedication to this. Parasites can harbor other contaminants, right? Heavy metals, things like that. How often is that the case?
Yeah, infections too. So that's the whole correlation with viruses. And then not only can they harbor the viruses and bacteria and metals, and they may play a role in helping with that, but they also play a role in suppressing immune system function that then allow the infections to take over. So that's why people will really cycle with these infections and until you get the parasites knocked down and your energy up, which is why I focus so much on energy. It's just going to be a continual problem. That's why you have to address, knocking these things down while you're bringing the energy up. So if you never bring the energy up, these guys just go right back up.
Yep. Also, other things to do that can keep the infectious load down and treating nutritional deficiencies, especially with the heavy exposure to Roundup. And that's actually not only is an antibiotic, but it's also a mineral chelator. So it's literally grabbing magnesium, zinc, yttrium, copper, things like that out of kids. And how critical is it to have zinc, B vitamins, B6, to actually have good stomach acid?
It's essential, and that's the problem is that when this doesn't happen, the stomach acid goes down, then it provides an alkaline environment that then the bacteria thrive in, right? So the stomach acid is the first line of defense for our body, and when we don't have that, then and the acid levels aren't good enough, which depletes our digestion of protein, and then stuff stays in our stomach for a lot longer, and putrefies, or we can get acid reflux, and there's a whole list of things that you can go back to. The issue is we have to get the nutrients in, but is it a nutrient problem? It may not be a nutrient problem as it is a toxin problem that you have in your body that you have to focus in on. That's why we created a product with some experts. One of them being Don Huber, is a emeritus plant professor, PhD from the University of Purdue, and our PhD on staff that we have that designed the product to bind the herbicides and pesticides to clear out of the body, because it's essential to get those out, so then we can heal the gut lining. We can get the right bacteria in the gut again, which then helps to produce B vitamins and some of the nutrients from our foods. So having the healthy microbiome is essential, and then supporting it with products, because when you lack B6 and zinc, it can create a pyrrole disorder, and then all these symptoms. It can cause issues with lack of heme, which is essential for detoxification, for creating energy, for antioxidant system, as well as good transportation of oxygen to the body, and then also those are essential elements in developing or making neurotransmitters and hormones.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of the anxiety, depression,
exactly,
striking behavioral changes, a host of mental illnesses all come from these parasite infections, because you're knocking out the ability to make those important neurotransmitters, right?
It is, and that goes back to not just that, but then the Roundup or the glyphosates and the toxins that create problems too. And then these teenagers eat crap food, and then they're depressed and anxiety because of their diets and all the toxins they're getting. They need to detoxify and change their diets, and they're a whole new person.
Yeah, yeah. And that's really important too. The Roundup has not only affected us, but it's also affected our what's called a shikimate pathway, and that is unique for bacteria and unique for plants that make our aromatic ringed amino acids, particularly phenylalanine, tyrosine, tryptophan, those are our precursors for dopamine and serotonin. So teenagers today, adults today, we're at 1 out of 2 adults with major depression today. Yeah. And a lot of it has to do with these deficiencies they have of just neurochemistry for the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So
for sure, I agree with you 100% on that.
Major problem. We just need more Zoloft, right?
Yeah, it's a lack of Zoloft. That's the problem.
So how often and this is another good question, how often are blood sugar problems such as diabetes, things like that, how often are they, the root cause of those missed by traditional doctors, of course, but also functional medicine doctors? How often are these blood sugar handling problems usually parasites that are causing these issues?
Well, there's a couple different things. There's high blood sugar, and then there's low blood sugar. And I have people that have hypoglycemia. They have issues with fasting, they get headaches, they don't detox well. So they're both. Strongyloides to me is more the low blood sugar, low blood pressure. Babesia is another one. There's several other can contribute towards that. Then you got the blood sugar handling issues of like a high blood sugar, diabetes, and that could be more pancreatic flukes and pesticides, herbicides. I've seen the tremendous cause of that being pesticides and herbicides.
Yeah, I see the same thing. Kind of talked about stomach acid. This is a little different, but I think it's equally as important. I remember a while back I posted a picture of a giant black squid that actually came out of a woman that had a ovarian growth. And what's interesting is I adjusted her before that happened, and she was harboring some emotional trauma dealt with her father. And when I was working on her, I said, there's something about your father coming up. And it happened to be this woman's birthday too. And she looked up at me as soon as I got done working on her and said, you gave me the best birthday gift ever. For 15 years, I've been harboring resentment towards my father. And you just allowed me to actually forgive him. That night, massive parasite release. So my question to you as an expert, how often do you see emotional connections involved with either getting released or things like that?
Similar situations. I had one gal, one of the first patients I worked with, and she went out of state to go see her ex-husband, and in doing so, just resolving some things there. She had a major release of parasites, and I see people going through the process of doing parasite cleansing, and they get really emotional. Like their whole, I mean, you never think about the emotions that are tied to it. So they're very driven by emotions and stress. And the other thing is not only do we need to get those emotional parasites out of our, parasites out of our gut, but we got to get the emotional or parasites in our lives out of our lives, because people can be parasites on us. And as we do that, our bodies just heal so much better. We don't have that constant stress.
Yeah.
But emotions. Whew.
And that that's so overlooked. Again, we're talking about that trauma thought toxins. That's usually right where I go with people when they come into my clinic. Is I have this adrenal recovery phase that we start day one, and I get them off all stimulants. I start going through some emotional freedom techniques, teach them various breathing techniques, teach them just how to be present and how to actually start loving themselves. And then as we go into the cleanse, boom, 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 they have great results with that. So emotions are just so overlooked today, and I think they're a big root cause of a lot of these things. Frequency and vibrational medicine. Do you think that's, like vibrational therapy, is that pretty helpful for clearing parasites out?
I think so. It's because, everything has an energy to it. It has a frequency to it. So I use it quite a bit in my clinic. And then I have patients that just get their own machines and use it at home. So I think it's an important part of the process.
Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. Very non-invasive. People, it's pretty effective. So, what is the best way for people to get a hold of you or reach out to you?
My website is drtoddwatts.com, drtoddwatts.com.
Okay.
That's usually the easiest way to do it. And they can email through there. My clinic's totalbodywellnessclinic.com. And we're redoing the website there too. So it's not as informational as I wanted to get there. People can learn a lot just on microformulas.com, and Cellcore Biosciences for our practitioners is really good. So
awesome. Well,
sure, Gabe, it's always great to see and talk to you. I appreciate it. I love your energy, and you're doing a great work out there.
Likewise, man. I really appreciate your time today. Let's keep in touch. And again, thank you for all you do, and thank you for all the hard work and dedication you do to this wonderful field that we're in of helping people get to the root cause.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, you have a good one, sir, and we'll talk soon.